Hello, everybody, and welcome back. I'm Nick Morgan. I'm the president and founder of ICAN, the Investor Choice Advocates Network. And with me today are two special guests to talk about our topic. First, another member of the ICAN board, Jorge Pesok. George is the chief legal officer of the HBAR Foundation. George, thank you for joining.
Happy to be here.
And we're also joined by John LaBella, who's a partner at Alix Partners. And among many other things, John is a member of the team of people from Alix Partners and others who are reconstructing the accounting at FTX. John, thank you and welcome.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
So the topic we're getting together to discuss today is, I think, truly remarkable, at least in my experience, and that is SEC Staff Accounting Bulletin 121 is the subject of a current evaluation, shall we say, by Congress under the Congressional Review Act. And what the Congressional Review Act does is it enables Congress to take a look at rules that are promulgated by various administrative bodies like the SEC. And if they're so inclined, they can try to pull back that rule. So in this case, that has been done, and you guys will talk about that in some detail. But I think one of the most interesting things is that this is not on its face a rule. On its face, it is a staff accounting bulletin, which is put out by members of the SEC staff. But there was a determination back in 2023 by the GAO that this staff accounting bulletin was a rule for purposes of the Congressional Review Act, which is how Congress got involved. So rather than me going on, George, why don't you tell us, why is staff accounting bulletin, or SAB 121, important to the crypto industry and others?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. That was a good lead in. I think from my perspective, and it might be controversial, but I view SAB 121 as the first shot across the bow by regulators in the industry as part of choke point 2.0, what it's referred to it nowadays. Choke point 1.0 was when different agencies led by the DOJ were trying to cut off businesses like the firearms and payday lenders from the traditional financial systems, such that with the intent of essentially killing them off. Choke point 2.0 is going after the crypto industry, and I think SAB 1.121 was the first shot, where it made it so that financial institutions that hold customers' digital assets, or essentially custody them, had to hold them as liabilities on their books, which means financial institutions have a lot of requirements with regard to their capital requirements. So if you have a liability, you have to offset that, and now you have to, and that makes it unattractive to provide services to the digital assets industry. And one of the main choke points that the digital assets industry has are the lack of on and off ramps. In other words, if you want to get into digital assets, how do you convert your fiat or your USD into a digital asset, and then go from your digital asset back to fiat? This was a way to prevent that choke point from being alleviated.
Right. And so maybe bring us up to speed. So that's SAB 121, but the most recent current events that we're going to talk about here have to do with Congress, and to maybe just bring us up to speed on that real quick.
Sure. Actually, before Congress got involved, I think you alluded to it, the Government Accountability Office did a review of the SEC's push for SAB 121, and actually determined that the SEC kind of got over its skis, because it pushed through this kind of this rule without getting congressional oversight. And that's a huge deal, right? It essentially said, hey, SEC, you went too far. And that's when Congress got involved. The House voted to overturn it. Recently, the Senate, in a bipartisan vote, which is remarkable. If anybody's following politics, it's remarkable to get a 60-38 vote to repeal it, including Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. Mind you, the biggest proponent on the Democratic side, of course, is Elizabeth Warren, the leader of the anti-crypto army, as she calls it openly. But you have the leader of the Democratic Party voting against her position. So it's creating a rift within the Democratic Party. Now, President Biden has indicated, or the White House has indicated, that they would veto this repeal. But with a 60-38 vote, it might behoove them to reconsider that position. And they still have another 6 days. This is, so they have until May 28th to make a decision. But now, recent events, you have former President Trump coming out and saying he's going to raise a crypto army to fight the anti-crypto army by Elizabeth Warren. And you have a 60-38 vote in the Senate. I suspect that it's changing. The tides are changing, and maybe we won't get a veto.
Yeah, well, this is unprecedented, like I said, in my experience, not only the part of it that you just described. In other words, there's this bipartisan repeal, but you've got a bipartisan repeal potentially of a rule that's, on its face, not a rule. And now you've got President Biden kind of in a fix. And I know a lot of people have brushed up on their congressional parliamentary procedure to see, does President Biden actually have to veto it? And there's this pocket veto idea. So a lot of speculation, but I guess we'll all be a lot smarter on the outcome of this next week. But John, do you agree this is kind of a remarkable set of circumstances around SAB 121, and what happens whether it's vetoed or not?
Yeah, it is quite remarkable. And if you step back and think about what SAB 121, when it was issued March or April of 22, it was nearly immediate. It was effective June 22. So immediately folks had to get in line. And as you mentioned, George, it is definitely cooling to banks and others who might otherwise be getting into some of these custodied roles. Now that we have Bitcoin ETFs and others being approved, banks aren't able to get in on this because it is onerous. If you look at it, not only are you getting into just putting that asset and that liability on your books, you have to fair value it every period. And if you look at the disclosure requirements under SAB 121, you're talking about describing the categories of crypto that you have, disclosure around concentration, disclosures around risks associated with loss and such. It's fairly robust. And I think Coinbase is a good example. If you take a look at their disclosure, you can imagine as you go down the road a bit, when you have platforms with it's fairly nuanced crypto instruments, just fair valuing those can be costly. It can be administratively burdensome. There's a lot, but and probably first and foremost, you have this sector of business moving forward in the crypto world for which banks can't participate. A staff accounting bulletin is officially not a rule and only reflects not even the commission, but the commission staff's views of accounting related disclosures and in their administering of the federal securities laws. And so you could say, well, it's not a rule, but if you were to say ignore SAB 121, you would do so at your own peril and at great peril. And maybe a good parallel says, look at SAB 99. Anytime an entity is dealing with just determining whether something's material or not, you look to SAB 99. SAB 99 gets into great detail around whether something is not just a quantitative measure, there's qualitative measures, there's did it reverse trends, there's all these other attributes that in any investigation, any auditor that's evaluating materiality, they all look to SAB 99. You'd be crazy to ignore SAB 99. So when you talk about what happens if this is not, if this is vetoed and this stays in effect, I think you have a continuation of all the concerns that we've just talked about with the more traditional banking organizations getting involved in something like this for all the cost prohibitive reasons. And why that is even important is when you think about the fact that there's such a concentration in these ETFs and who is custodying these assets. There's consumer risk potentially that you don't have more diversification. So if we don't see a veto and we see status quo, I think you will see a further narrowing of any organization able to take on custodying such assets, because the rules would be onerous to try and abide by quarter after quarter.
Yeah, that's great insight, John. Go ahead, George.
All right, John, that was great insight, actually, and I agree with the risk that you identified, the risk disclosures, right? Because I think that SEC did something similar a couple of years ago when they came out with the broker dealer kind of the digital asset broker dealer requirements, where it's like in order for them to manage or like hold digital assets, they have to understand the risks associated with that particular asset. And mind you, I'm in the industry, so it's like I think I know a little bit more than the layperson about especially like the layer one that I work with. But even then, it's like requiring broker dealers to understand the risks associated with getting, like, if you're using Outlook. If Outlook gets hacked, it means I have to understand and be able to disclose what the risks associated with Outlook being hacked. That seems extremely onerous and almost prohibitive. But then also, by requiring the custodians to put it on their books as a liability, it's a risk for the actual retail customer, because if there's a bankruptcy, now that becomes part of the bankruptcy process, right? As opposed to sitting outside of that. John, I know you're involved in some of these bankruptcies. Is that correct or not?
No, that you bring up a great point, and in fact, even in looking at the reasoning why, at least according to SAB 121, is just the point that you touch on, that there's lack of legal precedent and there's significant legal questions surrounding how arrangements will be treated in a court proceeding arising from an adverse event, such as bankruptcy. It's unsettled. Also, regulatory risk. There are fewer regulatory requirements around holding crypto. So all those unanswered items absolutely put you at great risk if you're putting such assets and liabilities on the balance sheet. That is dead on, and it further serves to dissuade, I think, the folks taking this on.
Yeah. I'll throw out one additional possible event that might happen if this is vetoed, and that is the possibility that others will bring litigation challenging SAB 121 as a rule. I don't think the SEC anticipated having to comply with the Administrative Procedures Act, so I think this is vulnerable to litigation challenge as well. But well, I guess we'll all be a lot smarter, but maybe as a closing goodbye, we can all take our guesses as to what President Biden's going to do. John, you want to go first? What do you think? Veto or no veto?
Boy, that's tough. I'm thinking he may look at the landscape and say, I don't see enough to overturn my veto. I think he will support the commission and support his regulators. And there are other crypto proposed legislation coming down the pike. I think he vetoes this one, fights another day, and is safe in the comfort that there is not enough of a majority to overturn a veto. George,
you agree?
I don't actually. I think that the tides have actually turned. If you had asked me 2 days ago, I would have 100% agreed. I think seeing a 60 vote majority in the Senate, including Chuck Schumer, against Elizabeth Warren, who's been leading this charge, I think that raises some red flags, including, and not only that, but Trump's recent. He came out and said not only is he accepting crypto as part of donations, but that he's like welcoming to the industry. I don't think in a close election, as we expect it to be, that Biden wants to lose any votes in this industry. I think the crypto industry has proven that it has sway within Congress, and I just think it would be foolhardy to veto this at this point when you have such a bipartisan vote in the Senate, in both houses, actually.
Yeah. Well, I hope he doesn't veto it, but I'm afraid I'm with John on, I think he is going to veto it, unfortunately, which is good because that'll give us some litigation options here at ICAN. But
we should put some crypto on it.
We should. Yeah, that's right. Well, we'll do that offline. But hey, John, thank you so much for joining. George, thank you for joining. Everybody else, thank you for joining, and we'll see you at the next ICAN SEC Roundup. Until then, goodbye.